This is the Benefits Buzz Podcast, your weekly pulse on what's happening in the world of employee benefits. Brought to you by your friends at WEX, who believe in simplifying benefits for everyone. Now listen up and let's get buzzed. Hey everyone, it's another episode of Benefits Buzz. I'm your host, Eric Pilla, and I'm joined with Hayden Goethe. Hayden, we got a great episode on tap, don't we, my friend?
Yeah, we sure do, and it seems like you're digging deep for this episode. Your voice is lowering to an octave that you don't normally get to.
Well, you know, we've it's been a busy season so far. We're doing some great job cranking out new episodes for season 5, and I got to keep the instrument, lubricated. I've got my water here. I'm ready for a really fun conversation, and I'm so pumped about this episode too. By the way, for those of you who are avid listeners, we ended season 4. We kind of culminated with an episode around HSA Day. And one of the things that we just really nerded out hard on the power of the HSA and the versatile use of it. And one of the things that we did, and Hayden, you had a really good hand in this, we talked about HSAs in the way as a tool for retirement. And, how you can invest money in there, you can have that grow and you can use it when you're, and it's a great way to use the HSA. At the same time, the beauty of the HSA is it can be used in a variety of different ways by a variety of different people. And we know that more than half of Americans do not have enough savings to cover an unplanned expense of even $1,000. So the idea of taking a bunch of dollars and having them saving for retirement maybe isn't necessarily in their game plan. And so what we want to do in this episode is really look at HSAs in a different way, right? We want to understand how HSAs are being used by the majority of people that have them, because it'll help us better understand their versatility and the ways they can be used across the board. And to do that, we have an excellent guest. It would not be an episode or a season of Benefits Buzz without Chris Bird. He is our Executive Vice President of Healthcare Operations here at WEX. Chris, welcome again to the show.
Thank you. It feels like I'm home. But be honest with your audience here. I just begged you for another spot on the show. I was missing it. I just had to come back, and I finally wore you down. So it's good to be back.
Chris seems like the natural pick for the temporary co-host, to be honest. I mean, he's probably been on this show more often than I have.
Yeah,
so.
You better be careful what you ask for, Chris. We could have some of our guests be our co-hosts as much as you love it. Well, you're too kind, and we love having you on here because you're always one of our top-rated guests. You have such an eloquent way of sharing information, and this is a topic I know that everyone is eager to hear about. And so let's dive into that. I really want to talk about HSA behavior. I want to talk about what we have seen, what behaviors we've seen, and how people are interacting with the HSAs. Because again, we love to talk about all the maybe unique and interesting ways, but there's also the most common ways. And that's where I want to get the heart to this. So what do you see the industry is getting out of HSAs right now?
Well, I think, the industry's done a really good job of talking about HSAs the way that we talk about it at HSA Day, right? Which is because it's such a unique instrument. It's the only triple tax-free benefit that's out there. It's the only financial instrument that allows you to do that, right? So, there's tax advantages and really focused very much on the investing aspect, right? That it's such an efficient way to be able to put away money for future retiree needs, right? Just start putting it away when you're in your 20s, and all of a sudden you wake up one day and you got 6 figures in your HSA and you go, wow, I'm feeling really good about that. So I really think, HSAs have been around now for almost 20 years. And I think it's an industry from, the industry custodians all the way down to brokers and employers. We've nailed that message about retirement, right? Milliman says that the average couple that is retiring today at age 65 is going to need $350,000 in today's dollars, right? And it's like $550,000 in future dollars just for their cost of health care for supplemental insurance or out-of-pocket expenses. So I think we've nailed that message really, really well.
It's still wild to think about that. It kind of makes you, like, I better start saving. That's a lot. That's a lot of money to save up for. And every time I hear that number, it still kind of punches me in the face. I'm like, oh, wow, it's great, like you said, to be thinking about that. But then we also know, as I know we're going to get to, is boy, I've got a lot of expenses happening right now, let alone me having the luxury of thinking about all those dollars I need to save for the future, right? So what are we getting wrong? Like, not that we're getting it wrong, but how should we be maybe positioning HSAs a bit differently, or at least in tandem with how we've currently been doing it?
Yeah, I think it's okay to say we're getting it wrong or that we've gotten it wrong. Let's be hard on ourselves, right?
Sure.
But it's the flip side of that, right? We've almost been single-threaded in the HSA world on investing in retirement and the long-term benefits of this. But the reality is that the vast majority of people today do not use health savings accounts in that way. And quite frankly, if you look across the population in a typical employer, unless you're a law firm or something like that, right, that has nothing but high income people, you've got a whole diversity of population out there, from people who can comfortably save for retirement to people who are struggling to live paycheck to paycheck, right? So there is no single prototypical HSA account holder, HSA user, right? They vary in income, in the amount of liquid savings they have, their age, the size of their household, ethnicity, even risk tolerance, right? And so, it's really, really important. And I think we need, as an industry, to start realizing and paying more attention to a balanced message that encompasses the broad diversity of that audience and targets various messages to people depending on not only who they are, but where they are on their journey.
Yeah, you just segued right into what I wanted to ask you about, because you're getting into a really good territory that I think is like an important point to talk about, which is, it's not even just like HSA users as in like, I'm a spender, I'm a saver. It's like we all kind of transition into those different phases at different times, right? I mean, is that kind of what you've seen in terms of statistics too?
We have, we've done some work, and I'll talk about it during the course of this podcast, but we've done a lot of work mining our database. We've got 7 million plus health savings accounts on our platform that we're the record keeper for now. What does that allow us to do? That allows us to look at people, not only about where they are now, but look at them over time, right? Because we've had this huge statistically significant database. And what we found is that there are 7 distinct profiles that we have been able to identify of a health savings account holder, a health savings account user. Everything from the person who rarely or never uses their account, the person who's just getting started, the person who's spending it all, the person who's dutifully trying to build up some savings, somebody who has a lot of savings and maybe they're later in life, maybe they're a retiree and they're spending it down, right? And then of course we have those investors, right? So we have all these different profiles, and we didn't set out with these profiles in mind. It's we mined the data, and the good data scientist doesn't go in with any answers, just questions, and says, what is the data telling me? And so yes, we do see that there are a lot of different profiles, but we also see movement. We see movement from one profile to the other, and it can be anywhere from like 20 to 40% will move in one direction or another over time, as their journey continues.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think about even my life, and I think regardless of, what your economical or social, situation is, no one's immune to emergencies, right? And so that's the beauty of the HSA, is regardless of that, having those dollars be available is really, really, really important. And I think that's, something to really keep in mind as well. I know you've hit on as well. I'd love to hear your thoughts around, what are some of the challenges consumers are facing today? And we've seen maybe a modest growth, in HSAs. Do you see that growth increasing? Do you see it something that's catching on and more people turning to that? Would love to get your thoughts around.
Yeah, I think the number one challenge that people are facing today, and this just doesn't have to do with healthcare and health savings accounts, but they're economic challenges. And in particular, and we're seeing a lot of third-party research more broadly in the economy, that people's number one concern right now is inflation, right? We just saw a statistic actually this morning that was released that said inflation in the last month was at 7.5% on an annualized basis. I mean, we haven't seen that in forever, right? If you look at wages, wages have been going up. We all know the businesses are having to pay more to attract and retain people. But the reality is that in December, according to the federal government, real inflation-adjusted hourly wages actually decreased by almost 2% compared to December of 2020. And so what's happening is people are making more money, but it's all getting eaten away. And so then if you take that and you think about healthcare, it's the same thing. Healthcare costs aren't necessarily going up immediately. They will go up in the future. But what happens is for that person that doesn't have a whole heck of a lot of extra money lying around, right? If their utility bills are higher, right? If they have to pay more for gas at the pump, if they have to pay more at the supermarket, and everybody knows how much more they're paying at the supermarket, all the daily things of life, it just leaves that much less available for if they suddenly get sick or, if they sprain their ankle playing basketball or whatever it might be, right? And they've got a deductible in the health insurance plan, they're going to have somewhere to go and get that money. The other thing I would say is this all relates to the area that we call financial health, right? We tend to think of health savings accounts as a sort of a hybrid of a healthcare and a financial product, right? But they're also a financial health product, and this is something that employers are starting to pay a lot more attention to. Nearly half of all employers are now either offering or plan to offer, for example, an emergency savings account. And over 3/4 of the employers in a recent survey that I saw said, I'm either moderately or very concerned about the financial health of my team, my employee population, right? They don't want them stressed. They don't want them spending time trying to figure out how to manage their household finances when they should be spending time at work. On the flip side, employees are saying, I'm stressed. Half of them are saying, I'm financially stressed. I'm worried about my household finances. And almost 3/4 of them are saying, I think it's my employer's responsibility to do things that help my financial health, my financial wellness, right? And so if you look at that from both the employer-employee perspective, and then you say, okay, well, what do health savings accounts have to do with that, right? Well, health savings accounts are a great financial health product because you're going to have healthcare expenses. There are very few of us who are so Superman or Superwoman that we're not going to get sick and nothing's ever going to happen to us, or somebody in our family is going to get sick. And so we're going to need healthcare, and we're going to need money to be able to pay for it. And so I think it's in that context that we think about HSAs. And for that reason, we're continuing to see very, very steady growth in health savings accounts. And last year, through the end of the year and through the enrollment season this year, we did see some increase in the growth rate that had tailed off a little bit during the pandemic as the economy has rebounded and people are starting to, reemerge and go back to work.
Yeah, I think the inflation point that you raised is a really good one, Chris. And I saw that stat too, where just so our listeners and viewers know, we're recording this in mid-February. So that stat was absolutely fresh this morning. Taking that into account, and thinking about just the versatility of HSAs, right? Like short-term savings, long-term savings, investment capability. How would you suggest maybe HR reps and our listeners position these accounts to better meet how participants need them today, considering that they're, we've seen slight increases in investment growth, year to year. But like you said, there really are some emerging short-term needs due to inflation. How do you think we should be positioning these today?
Well, I think you start with broad messaging. We're kind of nerdy in the healthcare business, and financial services organizations tend to be that way too, right? So we start to think about this in a little bit of a pointy-headed way and in an intellectual way. And the reality is, and we know this from research, I know this from having listened to consumers tell their own stories, that's not the way they approach health savings accounts. And that's not the way they approach their healthcare or their personal finances for that matter, right? They're very emotional about it, right? And so we spend a lot of time thinking about what are the emotional connectors that are really going to resonate with people and are really going to grab them and motivate them to do the right thing for them, right? So you start broad, this is what consumers say. They say HSAs give them peace of mind. I feel like I've got a security blanket, right? I heard a consumer say, I feel like this is my grandmother, right? Always gave me good advice, and I always felt safe in her presence and always took care of me, right? They make people feel smart, and everybody wants to feel smart. We hear the word control a lot, right? I'm in more control. I have more control over my healthcare if I've got a health savings account. These are not intellectual. This is not tax savings, right? This is not triple tax free. This isn't, this isn't, I've got 30 investment options I can give you. This is basic stuff, right? And this is the way that people think about it. So I would actually start there. I would start with very broad statements around why is a health savings account really, really beneficial to you?
Yeah, that's good. I think that's great. And I love that you talk about that. It's so interesting the way that employees are looking to their employers for more. Like we literally just finished a white paper talking about employee wellness, which included mental health and physical health and financial wealth and health, right? And those three, right? And I think this is such a great medium. You talked about that financial health piece of it. If they're looking to their employer. So again, if I'm an HR pro and I'm listening to this episode, I'm thinking, what are the perks I need to just hit home, right? So that it's really, really clear that A, we're supporting you, and B, here's how you can get the most out of what you have enrolled in with an HSA.
Yeah, well, again, I think you start with the broad themes that I just talked about, and then the messages are really going to depend on the individual, right? And I mentioned that there are all these different profiles of health savings account owners, and they're very different, right? And so the message that resonates really depends upon the individual and where she or he is, on that profile spectrum, and perhaps even what direction they're moving in, to the left or to the right. So for example, if you're somebody who's just starting out with a health savings account, you just signed up for the first time, right? The messages are going to be very different. It's going to be, hey, here, learn more about your HSA, and you bring them along slowly, right? And you give them some of the basics, right? And not just about your HSA, but how to use your HSA, right? If you're somebody who's saving, and I've heard this story a number of times, I've got a $5,000 deductible, and I want to save up at least $5,000 in liquid savings, so I know that I've always got that deductible covered before I start investing, right? So let's say you're on that path, right, and you're halfway there, right? It's messages that help them understand how they can save now, and tips for discipline and tips for saving, and so that they have that money to spend later. But messages that basically recognize, hey, you're going to be a spender at some point, right? We've done some work recently on people who aren't investors, but we think are approaching that point in their journey where they could and should be investors, right? And one of the messages that resonated there was, look how easy it is to set up an investment account and use that investment account. And I think easy is a big word too. I'll stop there, or finish there. Easy is a big word. People want to know that it's easy to do all of this. It's easy to understand it, and it's easy to use it. And so I think that's one thing that would kind of weave through the messages that would resonate with anybody, no matter where they were in the profile.
Well, and I think, to your point too, I think a lot of this messaging really needs to depend on behaviors. Is that what you'd say? Rather than I think there's an inclination sometimes to think oh, somebody's going to get an HSA, and in their first year, they're going to use it as a spender. And maybe they'll do that for a couple of years. Then they'll use it as a saver. And then maybe after 5 years or 7 years or 8 years, you're going to start, using it as an investment tool. Really what you're talking about is it really is more about their behavior itself. It's not like investment is going to be for everybody at certain lengths of time, of how long you have the account. Is that fair to say?
I think that's absolutely fair to say. Again, everybody's unique. Everybody's on a different part of their journey. And the other thing that I mentioned before that I think is really important is everybody has a different risk tolerance. There's some people who are going to be naturally drawn to investing. There are other people who are always going to be somewhat hesitant to invest because they know that markets go up and markets go down, and so they seek the safety and stability of a more liquid health savings account, even though they may be in the long run rationally, not taking advantage of some opportunity for better returns on that money. And you really have to respect that, right? And you have to make sure that you're still connecting with that person regardless of who they are.
Yeah, that's great advice. And one of the things that I hear is just really when I think again, really understanding where those individuals are at, how they need their HSA and what's most important to them, and encouraging them to wherever they're at in that journey or wherever they're at on that spectrum, to be able to say, here's how this HSA can support you depending on where you're at. And I think that's really, really important. The more that we can hit that home and have that personalized communication will really, really help. We literally just did an episode at the beginning of the season talking about, I've just enrolled, now what? Right? I got I made it through open enrollment, and now what do I do? And so I think this is an iteration of that, saying, hey, not only is it good to understand your benefits, but where you're at with your benefits and how you look to them in different ways. So love the advice, Chris. So I can't let you off the show without asking you a question about legislation, because while Hayden and I have our feet up and we're watching the Olympics or we're watching our favorite guilty pleasure TV show, we know that, your other part of your job is just understanding what's happening in legislation, right? And being on the Hill and understanding what's happening. It's midterms, so I don't know if there's any major shakeup, but I'd love to hear, especially around HSAs, if you see anything in your crystal ball with decisions around HSA or benefits in general with midterms approaching.
Well, it is a midterm election year, and it sounds kind of quiet. The Build Back Better plan isn't dead, but it's pretty quiet. And the emphasis in the halls of Congress right now is on basic things like we've got to keep the government running, right? So we have to pass a resolution around that. With regard to health savings accounts, there's nothing immediately teed up in the hopper, I would say, right? But what's important to employers and to the HSA industry is continuing to advance this idea that we would benefit from having a bit more flexibility in the health insurance plan designs that are deemed to be compatible with health savings accounts. The reality is that the health insurance plan design restrictions of the health savings account were put into law in 2003. How many versions of the iPhone have been released since 2003, right? How many versions of the HSA qualified plan have been released? We're still on version 1. Right. And so if we were a tech stock in the HSA plan design business, we'd be out of business. The HSA needs to evolve with the times. And what we're hearing a lot from employers is, I need more flexibility. Just like we said that there's no single prototype of an HSA account holder, there's no single prototype of an employer and that employer's population, right? One employer might have a much older blue collar team. Another employer might have a very young technology team that are building families, right? And these other folks are marching toward retirement, and everything in between, right? High demographic in terms of socioeconomic, low demographic. And so what employers are saying is, look, let me decide what to cover in the healthcare plan, and don't put me in this box that nothing can be covered underneath the deductible, because that doesn't work. Right. I want to be able to cover chronic care conditions because I'll save money in the long run and I'll have a more productive workforce, those kinds of things. Right. And so, we're working on a lot of ideas that would give employers some latitude to tailor their insurance plan designs and still have those insurance plan designs be HSA compatible, so that their employees and their families can still have the benefit of the health savings account. Right. And so that's a theme that we've been kind of a steady drumbeat of message to Congress that we've been carrying for a number of years. And we're making that a real focal point in 2022. Now, whether anything actually gets done or not, it's going to be hard to get stuff done this year. I think Congress is going to be very quiet. I don't think it's going to be very active. You'll be surprised at how quickly, members of the House start scurrying back to their home districts to run for re-election. Right. And those kinds of things. But there's always chances to get things done. And if we can get something done, that's what we would like to get done.
Awesome. That's great information, Chris. You've given us so much in this episode to think about, and I think a lot for our listeners and viewers too. You're a pro, you know the drill. We always cap off with just asking you, do you have one single tip, if you could delineate everything you've given to us today for our HR reps and C-suite listeners to take away from this episode?
Yeah, I think it would be this. It would be, one size fits all doesn't work, and it shouldn't work more broadly for your benefits that you're providing to your employees. But certainly from a health savings account perspective, one size fits all doesn't work. Think about HSAs broadly. Don't forget the retirement piece. I mean, there's some exciting things going on there. There's a lot of stuff going on in retirement and investing. Even outside of HSAs, that is going to democratize investing and make it a lot easier for the small dollar investor to get into the market in really innovative ways. And I'll tease you a little bit with stay tuned for what we've got coming on that, because we're really, really excited about it. But also don't forget those folks who are struggling paycheck to paycheck, right? And the last thing, and this is something I'm going to bring in just right out of left field because we haven't talked about it, is if you are an employer and you're thinking about your benefit design and you're using health savings accounts, make a contribution to your employees' HSA. Share some of your premium savings back with your employees in the form of a contribution to the HSA. It doesn't have to be a lot. 500 to 750 is kind of a sweet spot for single coverage, and 1,500 plus or minus is a sweet spot for family coverage. What that does, and we have found this through through demonstrated research that we've done on our database, is when an employer does that, their employees respond by putting more money in of their own money in, using their health savings account in a better way, and engaging with the product more. And so there's a catalytic effect there, almost like a 401k match. And so that would be the last thing I would tell an employer to do. It's really important.
Yes, sound advice, Chris. As always, every episode with you is a home run. Thank you so much for coming on the show. I love the tease, by the way, of some work we got coming out. So stay tuned for that. Hint, hint. We have our own exciting, not nearly probably exciting, but we actually are working on some Benefits Buzz swag. And if there's any guest that deserves to have that, I think last time I promised you a green jacket for as many times if you've been on the podcast. I didn't deliver on that, but we're going to have some Benefits Buzz swag. We're going to hook you up, whether it's a hat or a hoodie or a beanie. I don't know, whatever you want, Chris, we will get it together for you, for being such a great guest as always. Thank you.
Oh, I'm all in. Thanks. I'll look forward to it.
Eric,
I'll hold you to that promise, buddy.
I know you're a Saturday Night Live fan. I mean, Chris is probably on the brink of the 5 Timers Club here for SNL. So
that's exactly
we might have to come up with something for him there.
Yeah, that's what we exactly. So whatever we get, Chris is the first person who gets it and can don it and show it off. So
I think
Chris,
you're about to give me a Lifetime Achievement Award and send me sailing off into the sunset, guys.
It does feel that way, doesn't it? Oh, speech. Now, thanks so much, Chris. A really, really fun episode. Thank you so much. And we're definitely going to have you back on the podcast again. So take care.
Always a pleasure. Always a lot of fun.
WEX is in the business of simplifying benefits for everyone. Now, although we certainly hope our podcast sparks some aha moments, like that was pretty cool, but of course we cannot provide legal, investment, or financial advice. And, well, therefore, nothing shared in this podcast should be interpreted as such. We encourage you to seek out appropriate professional advice regarding your plans. Hey, congratulations! You made it through our disclaimer. Thanks for listening.